my personal least favorite season 4 episode is Ghost Host. I have very strong negative feeling towards this episode. I actively dislike how this episode is sort of starting the trend of Spongebob episodes looking needlessly disturbing and disgusting, how there is nothing exciting going on, and how there's not even one remotely funny joke in this episode. The Flying Dutchman was a character with so much potential, but they turned him into this dull, bland, and downright annoying ghost of his former self. No pun intended. I don't know, I'm glad for anyone who can enjoy this episode, but I so don't like this one. God, how I don't like it. Fungus no. I will not talk about this episode. I refuse. Okay. Let's do it. Let's quickly run down why Fungus Among Us is the most idiotic, pointless, insulting, hideous, I mean, I don't have to explain most of this to you, do I? Just looking at this footage speaks for itself, and I hope that you are, because I certainly can't. This health hazard of an episode fails at having a good narrative, anything remotely resembling entertainment, or any form of redeeming qualities, really. But most of all, it is just unpleasant to look at, which is putting it very lightly. I despise this episode with every fiber of my soul, and won't waste another second of my life talking about it. Whew, I'm glad that's settled. Can only get better from here. The Splinter. The Splinter! Oh, what can be said about this episode that hasn't already been said a million times? Nothing, really. So let me reiterate, because whatever you have heard about it is 100% true, and anyone denying it is living a lie. This is, without a doubt, the single most grotesque, unnecessary, poorly paced, hideous, gross, disturbing, cringe-inducing, and just incomprehensively bad episode of SpongeBob's first 6 seasons. And that's saying a lot, seeing as how I've already talked about Fungus Among Us and Flea in Her Dome. When I shared my thoughts on those episodes, many of you were quick to point out that I don't seem to like gross out episodes all that much. And you're right! You might even say that I consider episodes that do nothing more than rely on making the viewer cringe and to shock them to be the lowest form of entertainment in animation, at least when there is nothing else going on that supports the episode in terms of humor or plot, of which there is exactly none here. All of it is simply built around SpongeBob's mutated toffee apple-looking thumb. Oh, you know what, that isn't exactly true. We also have some patronizing of Squidward towards SpongeBob and foot fetishism thrown into the mix. Doesn't that just scream fun? The good news is that this episode is so terrible that all the other episodes on this list are immediately way better just by comparison. So I guess we should really be thankful for the Splinter. Did I just say that out loud? Hell for Gary. Do I really need to go in detail on what this episode did wrong? Because I don't think I do. If there's one episode that got talked into the ground, for a reason I might add, it's this one. Luckily, this seems to be something we can all agree on, so it's not like this is a controversial statement or anything. But what if I told you there is actually some good to be found in this episode? It's got a lot of things going against it, don't get me wrong, like how it is another episode that has SpongeBob getting a new pet that Gary doesn't get along with, how Fluffy's design is abysmal and only gets worse within the episode, how Gary really doesn't do much to deserve the way he was treated in this episode, and that there is a bunch of stuff that just straight up doesn't make sense, like how SpongeBob is suddenly speaking Spanish for some reason, but I like how they brought it back around with Gary using his lasso to capture Puffy Fluffy, since he, of course, has watched the Western before, and yeah, okay, that's about it. I will say, however, that I don't have as strong an agenda against this episode than the lowest points in the other seasons. It's a really bad episode, but it isn't a complete disaster. I didn't find it as insulting as other stuff, just plain bad. Probably the most annoying thing was how super oblivious SpongeBob was here, and how Mr. Krabs suddenly showed up out of nowhere, and how it makes zero sense that Gary being at home is suddenly a problem. You know what, the more I'm talking about this episode, the less I like it, so maybe we should just move on. Cat Sitter Pat. Whew. Okay. I actually don't genuinely despise the episode, at least not from a moral standpoint, which of course you should never view them from anyway, but that is what made me dislike most of the episodes are ranked very low on the other lists. That they had one significant feature that I found to be absolutely terrible, overshadowing the usually already subpar other qualities the episode had. Here it is pretty much the same thing. Patrick is super unlikable and a lunatic beyond the point of being charming due to Gary being a victim in this scenario. As soon as there is a victim involved, that usually damages the episode, and due to that makes me as a viewer appreciate the rest of the episode less, because they expect us to take the moral high ground and side with Gary, who in most of these episodes doesn't get justification in the end. However, I found that in this one, while Patrick doesn't necessarily get punished for any of his actions, Gary also gets the chance to have a moment of relief after everything Patrick has done to him, making the ending feel a lot more justified than most of the other episodes that featured a negative portrayal of how the people Gary cares about treat him. While I realized that many people expected me to absolutely tear this episode apart, considering how big of a distaste I had towards Appel for Gary, which sure makes me stand out on this platform, and also due to how I said I would probably rank this as one of the worst episodes of all time, but after a lot of reconsideration, I would lie if I said that I found this episode to be downright horrific. I just found it to be not entertaining at all from a structural standpoint, because the stakes were not very high and most of it felt like loosely connected slapstick. It was more so a structurally poor episode along with a terrible moral than it was a downright insult to every one of my senses, like was the case with episodes like The Splinter and Fungus Among Us. It's a terrible episode and definitely the worst of the season, but it both isn't far ahead of the next pick and is by no means as bad as some of the other lowest picks in the other seasons. There. Are you happy now? Little Yellow Book. What an awful, awful episode. Squidward taking the liberty of reading SpongeBob's diary is bad enough as is, but seeing the whole town joining in on making fun of him for no reason other than to ridicule him just really rubs me the wrong way. We may have had episodes like Grandma's Kisses and April Fools in the past where either or the other were the case, and SpongeBob also saw himself forced to justify his behavior, but never did it drag on for as long or was as unpleasant to watch as in this pile of garbage. The worst part about it is that it doesn't even feel good to see Squidward get the punishment for what he did afterwards, as those parts are equally unfunny but drag on for even longer. But if that wasn't enough, we then also have Squidward not having learned anything and just going on to read SpongeBob's other diary and obviously having as much of a blast. I somewhat get that this episode was trying to go into the direction of showing how rules are to be broken and that it's fun to find out stuff about other people they wouldn't normally tell you at first. But in any other cartoon, the character responsible for it would at least get some sort of comeuppance and not just continue making the same mistakes. That would at least make me have some respect left for this one, but as is, it's nothing more than an irredeemable and unfunny mess. Brains. If I were to pitch you an episode with the premise of SpongeBob, Patrick, and later on the entire city of Bikini Bottom pulling out their brains and remote controlling them into kitchen sinks and toilets, or making immature fart noises while replacing the hollow head shells with diapers, and you somehow don't see any issue with that, then I think you might see yourself disagreeing with this list a lot. The episode is not terrible by any means. Some of the jokes were alright, and it was kind of fun seeing the town jump on this trend so quickly without really thinking about the consequences. But I still feel like they could have done a better commentary on the problems drones can cause, as they have shown to be capable of more topical issues like last season's bulletin board. And there's also that whole sticking a whole diaper in your head thing. I can't stress that enough. Okay, new rule. What if we went through this entire list without once mentioning this episode? Huh? No? Do I have to? Okay, but it won't be stuff you haven't already heard 800 times, so basically, this just might be the worst episode of the series so far. Not just compared to what we've gotten so far that has dragged the series down already, but also on its own, even when you can't set your expectations real low. Ladies and gentlemen, you can see all the classic elements of modern SpongeBob you've come to know and despise. Observe the excruciating detail with which we can see the inside of Patrick Starfish's armpits as he rips a band-aid of at half the speed of which should be acceptable. A solid 8 minutes of the episode, we see Squidward pseudo tentacles getting brutally mutilated, the lack of direction we witnessed that is only very poorly excused with them siphoning off Squidward's ink, which in itself takes the cake for grossest concept in all SpongeBob. And there's a spider? Listen, being a gross out episode is one thing, I can get behind that sometimes when executed well, but this one's just such a mean-spirited mess that I honestly couldn't blame anyone for not wanting to check out any more of the season after this experience. And it is an experience, I'll give it that, if not for the kind you would hope for. But you know what they say? When life gives you lemons, you throw them away because black lemons do not sound healthy.